Today we're going to talk about the eccentric Canadian who became the greatest ace in the battles over Malta. This guy was just... roll the intro. Before we start, go ahead and subscribe to the channel because that helps us out. YouTube recommends our videos and the channel grows more. And remember our deal. If you like this video, don't forget to share it with at least one friend of yours who also likes military history. So come with me. The young George Burling was born on December 6, 1921 in the small town of Verdun in the province of Quebec, Canada. His family was extremely religious. They read the Bible every day and had a literal understanding of it. George grew up in an environment where alcohol, tobacco, and any other pleasures were forbidden. The family lacked a radio. Though healthy and athletic, he never joined team sports. He was a loner by nature. But Burling found refuge in aviation. He had loved airplanes since he was 6 years old, when his father built a toy airplane for him. While his school performance was quite mediocre at the same time, he immersed himself in books about the aerial battles of the First World War. He studied tactics and maneuvers and hoped that one day he would become one of those men. Burling said that anyone could fly and anyone could shoot, but flying and shooting at the same time was a rare skill, one that he would master with excellence. He flew for the first time at 12 years old, and at 15 he dropped out of school to get a job and earn money to pay for flying lessons. Because of this, his parents started treating him very coldly and locked him in his room as punishment. Even such hostility couldn't stop Jorge from pursuing his dreams. He flew solo for the first time in 1938, shortly after turning 17. And he ended up passing all the exams to become a commercial pilot, but his license was rejected because he was still too young. He then entered an aerobatics competition in the city of Edmonton, where he competed against several fighter pilots from the Canadian Air Force. To everyone's surprise, young Burling became the champion. But when it was time to receive the trophy, he started a huge argument saying, "Look, if Canada depends on these pilots, we're screwed." The Air Force guys who heard that just said one thing, "Just wait, kid, your time will come." In September 1939, with the start of World War II, Canada immediately became involved on the side of the British Empire. Burling immediately went to the Canadian Air Force recruitment office. But guess what happened? He was rejected right away, despite his high flight qualifications. The Air Force claimed that he hadn't completed his studies. But come on, you and I both know why it was, right? In desperation, he tried to volunteer to serve in the Finnish Air Force. At the time, Finland was facing the Soviet Union in the so-called Winter War. However, the Finnish embassy in Canada required him to get his parents' permission. Again, guess what? No way, you're not going. Burling saw World War II as his only chance to fulfill his childhood dreams. He was nervous since he hadn't seen any combat yet. So, in the summer of 1940, he volunteered to join the crew of a munitions freighter that was setting sail from Canada to the United Kingdom. He arrived in Glasgow, Scotland after crossing the Atlantic, which was teeming with German submarines. Many ships around him were sunk, but him, he arrived unharmed. He reported to the 1st Royal Air Force recruitment post he found, but the recruiter asked for his birth certificate. And guess what? He forgot it at home. Burling then crossed the Atlantic again to go home and get his birth certificate. That's exactly what he did. He got the paper and returned to England. 3 Atlantic crossings in just a few weeks. Completely safe and sound. But he started to show his difficult personality traits right at the beginning of the training. He flew low under a control tower, knocking the guard down. And despite being constantly reprimanded for this wild behavior, he ended up completing all the stages of training brilliantly. It was undeniable that he had a natural talent for hunting. His deep blue eyes had an extraordinary precision, a skill that later on would make him known for spotting enemy aircraft long before anyone else. After training, he was offered an officer's commission, but Burling refused, saying he didn't trust officers and preferred to live among the sergeant pilots. But once his big mouth got him in trouble with his commanding officers. That's because Burling was assigned to the 403rd Fighter Squadron, a Canadian unit that had just been transferred to England. He ended up flying as the Tail End Charlie, a rear position in a peculiar English flight formation, which shortly after ended up being abandoned due to its ineffectiveness and high cost in lives. Because this was the most vulnerable position in the formation, it was typically assigned to less favored pilots. He flew his first mission on Christmas of 1941 aboard the aircraft that would accompany him throughout his career, the Supermarine Spitfire. On March 23, 1942, while flying over the English Channel, Burling spotted enemy aircraft approaching from afar. He warned over the radio, but his commander ignored him and told him to stay quiet. That's when 3 Focke-Wulfs approached at high speed from behind Burling. His instant reaction was to lower the landing gear and use full flaps, drastically reducing the speed of his Spitfire and causing the Germans to overtake him. That way he managed to return to England. But after landing, he had a heated argument with his commander, calling him stupid for not listening to his warning. As a result, he was expelled from the unit and transferred to the 41st Squadron of the Royal Air Force. He arrived at this new unit with his bad reputation preceding him, and once again, he took the position of Tail End Charlie. On May 1st, 1942, again he saw a distant plane, warned everyone, but was ignored. But this time, he decided to break formation, went alone in search of the enemy, and shot him down for his first victory. On his return, instead of being congratulated for shooting down the enemy, he got a serious scolding for abandoning the formation. That was the last straw for him. He couldn't take more reprimands, and his commanders were fed up with his insubordination. But that's when fate smiled upon him. Malta, a small island in the Mediterranean between Italy and Africa. It was under heavy attack from the German and Italian air forces who were determined to bomb the island. Until the surrender, Malta was a vital British air and naval base, which could attack Axis supply convoys to North Africa. And if it were lost, Rommel would have all the supplies he needed to secure his victory in Egypt. The island urgently needed reinforcements. At the end of May 1942, Burling volunteered for transfer to Malta, and the squadron commander quickly approved his request. So on June 9, 1942, at the age of 20, George Burling took off from the aircraft carrier His Majesty's ship Eagle with his Spitfire VB, a tropicalized version with a large radiator installed under the engine. He ended up landing at the Takali airfield in Malta in the middle of an enemy air raid. He was then assigned to the 249th Squadron, which was commanded by Major Percy Belgrave Lucas, or Laddie Lucas. Lucas had been previously informed about Burling's erratic behavior, but decided to take a slightly different approach with him. I suspected that his rebelliousness came from some underlying feeling of inferiority. I judged that what Burling needed was not punishment, but encouragement. His ego mattered a lot to him, and from what he said, the treatment he received in England was meant to bury him. I promised him that he would have all my trust, but that if he ever abused that trust, he would be transferred off the island. The next day, his bright blue eyes widened. He never disappointed me. He never socialized with his fellow pilots who would go relax with drinks and women. He focused on learning deflection shooting techniques, that is, the art of hitting moving targets. But look, for that, he used a .38 revolver and hit lizards that ran across the island, killing them with a single accurate shot. His odd self-training worked, because on July 6th, he shot down 2 Machi Century 200s, and 2 Italians and a German Messerschmitt Bf 109. Those 3 victories, added to the 2 he had already achieved before coming to the island, made him an ace. But Burling didn't celebrate and chose to be alone that night. In just 3 weeks in the month of July, Burling would shoot down no less than 15 enemy aircraft, all using his high accuracy with deflection shooting. This extraordinary skill of Burling, it was only matched by another young man who was fighting not far from there, Lieutenant Hans Joachim Marschelli, whom you can learn about in this video here. Despite always carrying with him on flights his inseparable Bible, which had been a gift from his mother, Burling showed a feeling of deep hatred and contempt for his enemies, and this virulence was reflected in his flying behavior. He was known for shooting German and Italian pilots who were parachuting down over Malta after their aircraft had been destroyed. He claimed he was afraid that the pilot might come back one day with another aircraft to kill him later. On July 12th, 2 Italian Reggiani RE 2001 fighters from the 2nd Caccia Group, piloted by Lieutenant Carlos Seganti and by Lieutenant Colonel Aldo Quarantati, approached Malta. The two came alone looking for an Italian pilot who had fallen into the water earlier that day. Burling spotted the 2 Reggianis from a distance and approached them without being noticed. The 2 Italians were completely focused on searching the sea. He accelerated and dove, firing a short burst at Seganti's fighter, destroying it immediately after. But what happened next to Colonel Quarantati? It was later told by Burling to a crowd in Canada, and it horrified everyone. If you can handle it, listen up. I got right under its tail. I was going faster than him, about 50 meters behind. I turned to the right and he looked to the left. I turned to the left and he looked to the right. So he still didn't know I was there. At that moment, I got within 30 meters and I was to his right at a 15-degree angle. Well, at 25 or 30 meters in the air, it feels like you're right on top of the person, because there's no background, no perspective. I could see the details of his face because he turned and looked at me right before I pulled the trigger. One of my bullets hit him right in the face and blew his head off. His body shook and the burst hit the base of his neck and blood spurted out the side of the cockpit. It was a wonderful sight, the red blood running down the white fuselage. I must say it gives me a feeling of extreme satisfaction when you blow their heads off. Because of this savage behavior and the fact that he liked to talk about his taste for killing people, his colleagues ended up nicknaming him Screwball Berlin, an English slang term that means crazy or psychotic. That's creepy, huh? But are you enjoying Burling's story? Tell me, who's your favorite fighter pilot? Leave it here in the comments and tell me why you like him so much. Burling's life in Malta wasn't just about victories. He was injured several times and was also shot down 4 times while serving on the island. He also got a severe case of diarrhea called dog that kept him in bed for over a week. Even while sick, Burling forced himself to his Spitfire to avoid missing the fights. July 27, 1942 was his greatest day in Malta, when he shot down 4 fighters and damaged 2 others. That morning, he downed 2 Machi, 202 fighters. One of them was actually the commander of the 151st Squadron, the top Italian ace over Malta, Captain Furio Niccolo Doglio Berlin. He later remembered just exploding into pieces in midair. On the 30th of that month, the Royal Air Force forced him to accept an official promotion. Berlin had already refused the promotion twice, and the Royal Air Force thought it was a disgrace that their greatest hero was still a sergeant. Despite accepting the promotion, Berlin continued to live with the sergeants. In October, he achieved another astonishing streak of victories in the air. But on the 14th, he flew his last mission over the island. That day, his Spitfire was chased by 2 Messerschmitts, which riddled the control surfaces with bullets and wounded him in the heel, the elbow, and the ribs. With his fighter's engine on fire, Berlin parachuted at low altitude and was found hours later in the middle of a red stain in the sea. The rescue team says he was delirious when found. He kept asking non-stop about his Bible. They searched his pockets and eventually found the Bible. And shortly after, he said he would be back to fight in a few hours. Despite heavy bleeding, Burling was evacuated to England for treatment, stopping in Gibraltar. All of this took place on a B-24 Liberator bomber. However, when the bomber was approaching Gibraltar, it crashed during landing, killing several people on board. Berlin was pulled out alive and was immediately taken to the hospital. On November 4th, he was awarded the Distinguished Service Order for his 28 aerial victories, which made him the greatest ace of Malta. At the end of 1942, Berlin was sent to Canada against his will to take part in a fundraising publicity campaign for the war. He hated that spectacle, and the audience, initially excited to meet their national hero, was frightened by the bloodthirsty speeches he gave. He was openly hostile to a group of little Girl Scouts who wanted to honor him with 28 red roses, one for each victory he had achieved. He was also very hostile to the press whenever questioned about raising funds for the war. All of this made his image once again be viewed negatively among military circles. His leg wound still hadn't completely healed. He had to return to the hospital for several weeks. After traveling all over Canada, he finally completed his mission there and returned to England in May of 1943. He was made an instructor, but he had no patience for it at all, and his wild behavior quickly stood out again. To avoid a court-martial within the Royal Air Force, in September of 1943, he was transferred to the Canadian Air Force, back to his first combat unit, the 403rd Squadron. Dissatisfied with the patrol missions over the English Channel, where little action happened, he requested command of a Mustang for deep penetration missions into German territory to seek out targets, but his request was denied. At the end of that year, furious with this situation, Burling grabbed a shotgun and shot at the wing of his commander's plane while he was flying over the airfield, in behavior that nowadays would be considered psychotic. In early 1944, he again clashed with his commander for making low passes over the airfield. He was forbidden to do it, but several times he disobeyed those orders. Burling was finally completely banned from flying, and not knowing what to do with him, the Canadian Air Force transferred him back to Canada in April 1944. In October that year, he was honorably discharged from the Canadian Air Force and transferred to the reserves. This is something that could be considered strange, since we're talking about such a talented fighter pilot, and also because the war was far from over. But when we remember George Burling's behavior, things become easier to understand. He even tried to volunteer to fly for the United States, but the Americans wanted nothing to do with someone as troubled as that. Despite all that, at the end of World War II, Screwball Burling remained the greatest of the Canadian aces and the top ace of Malta, with 31 confirmed aerial victories. His unit on that island, the 249th Squadron, ended up becoming the most successful Canadian fighter squadron in the Royal Air Force, with 245 enemy aircraft shot down during the fighting in Malta. In 1946, after being rejected from every job he applied for, Burling even resorted to begging on the streets of Montreal for a while. The ghosts of the war now haunted him, and he had constant nightmares about the German and Italian pilots he had shot down. But in 1948, his luck seemed to have changed. The young state of Israel was at war with its Arab neighbors and urgently needed volunteers to fight in its ranks. Burling volunteered and ended up being accepted. But upon learning about the shortage of combat aircraft in Israel, he even suggested that he could lead a group of pilots. And they attacked the Royal Air Force base in Malta to steal Spitfires and take them to Israel. They forbade him from doing that. He ended up leaving Canada on the Nerdwin Norseman aircraft heading to Israel, with a stopover in Rome. After landing in the Italian capital, he took off again for Israel on May 21st, 1948. But his plane mysteriously crashed during takeoff, killing him instantly. The true reasons for the plane crash remain unexplained. Since no one claimed his body for weeks, Burling ended up being buried in Rome. But in 1950, he was transferred to Israel and buried on Mount Carmel in Haifa. He is now seen as the hero of Israel's founding, the top Canadian ace, and among the greatest Allied aces. He remains to this day a dubious figure, an extraordinary fighter, but with a psychotic behavior that only brought him problems throughout his life. So did you like this video? If you did, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram. I'll stop here for now. Thank you so much for watching, and here's a big hug from SDG.